upon this strange mist of matter, causes something that Hermes in the vision describes as striving. Therefore, here we have an alchemical principle of motion releasing fire. We have motion as friction. And out of the motion of the will in the form of the hammer, or in the form of the active agent, we find there emerging out of space the 7 children of friction, called by Hermes the sons of striving. And these are the 7 deities, or the 7 planetary gods. And together these gods constitute what Hermes calls the second mind. Therefore there is the first mind, or the reason, which is the dragon. And there is the second mind, which is composed of the 7 governors, or the 7 cosmocrators, the objective forces of creation. These 7 governors form the demiurgus, or the second type of deity, the secondary god. And to such orders of deities would belong Zeus in the Greek order, or Jupiter in the Latin. These deities are the objectifications, the coming forth out of the darkness of cause into the great world of effects. Universal reason, the first mind, therefore operates through the second mind, which is the orderly sequence of creative bodies and worlds. And these 7 governors have their power from the great reason, which is the dragon. But they disseminate this power from themselves into the world, calling forth out of the darkness the shadowy substance of creation. These are indeed the spirits that move upon the face of the waters. These are the Elohim of Genesis. These are the Ammonian artificers of Egypt. These are the sacred vowels from whose combinations are formed the names of God. These 7 then become the carriers of the word. They are the disseminators. They are the diffusers and the distributors. And they sit upon their ancient thrones, or drive their chariots around the golden altar of the sun. We have therefore now the concept of the emergence of a universe, of a solar system, or of a power. Now in the midst of these procedures, Hermes beholds something still further. He beholds rising out of the deepness and darkness of things, Anthropos, the divine man. Anthropos seems to stand in the midst of all things. He appears to stand as an isolated and lonely creation. As Goethe says, twixt heaven and earth dominion wielding. This is the mysterious, primordial, archetypal, universal man. This is the total man. This mysterious great man of the Zohar, who stands with his head in the heavens, one foot upon the earth and the other upon the ocean. This is the great macrocosmic man. And this man, in the Hermetic doctrine, is the one and only begotten Son of the Father. And this is the man that stands forth as Anthropos, the man which is the son of the mind, the son of reason, in whose nature have been gathered all of the celestial elements. For this man is the final and most perfect of the archetypal projections of the mind of the Creator. This man, therefore, is that being made and fashioned in the image of the reason of God. Now we said that this man, we mentioned in a previous lecture, efforts have been made to parallel this man with the Christ of Christianity. as the only begotten, and also strangely as the celestial Adam. This power, which is also found in the writings of Bami and is symbolized by an upright, light letter A, even as the relapsed Adam is represented by a black letter A. This celestial man, however, is not truly a Christian figure. This does not mean that it is opposed to Christianity, but it cannot be said that this archetypal man of Hermes is simply patterned upon the Christ concept. Nor could it be safely said that the Christ concept could have been patterned upon this. It stands apart. For this man, fashioned by the Father, is truly the Redeemer of the world. It is truly the creature that was made to be proprietor over all things. It was this creature that was given the right to be a citizen in space, to wander from star to star, to gather experience in the great meadows of the constellations. This great man, this mysterious shadowy archetype, was a perfect, magnificent, heroic creature, almost in itself a god, yet a product of a god. And into this archetype, all of the essentials and essences of the divine nature were united, so that truly it was the noblest work of the Creator, and was really a kind of projection of himself. There may be a parallel to this in the idea of Osiris being reborn in his own son Horus. For it was through this great man or universal being which it had fashioned that reason came into its perfect rulership over matter, because this archetypal being was virtuous, gracious, full of light and wisdom, defective in nothing, deficient in nothing, because within it were all the potentials and powers of the eternal reason. Thus, in a way, eternal reason is consummated in the concept of archetypal human reason. Not the reason of the schoolman, but the reason of the internal intuitive being. For this being was not embodied. It was simply a great design, a great living archetype. Into this archetype, however, the Creator placed not only the tremendous potential of its own being, but it placed therein also the peculiar habit of itself, namely the habit of daydreaming. This creature, like its father, could project thoughts from its own mind. It likewise could conjure up ideas, fall in love with them, become possessed by them, and wander away from its own strange, ethereal space foundation. And there is a wonderful word picture of this universal man, this Anthropos, standing upon the rings of the seven governors, or the masters of the planets, and gazing downward into the mystery of the unknown. Hermes tells us then also a very interesting fact that I believe has become quite a point in Jungian psychology. Namely, that in the presence of the unknown, man is always in the position of being liable to a fall. The human being cannot, apparently, in his own personal psychology, survive a kind of mystery which, if it ever grasps him or envelops him, leads him into the strangest and most distant departures from reason and common sense. And in the vision, this Anthropos, this divine man, standing with the governors of all things, looks down into the abyss, looks down into the strange whirling shadows, somewhere in the midst of which there is a broad, desolate, plain-like area, matter. Matter which has swallowed up the radiance of the dragon. Matter, all all of the atoms of which are seminal with God, filled with the seed of God, filled with the power to bring forth dragons of themselves, filled with life, this life being more or less than the thought of reason, the eternal thought of the eternal thinker. And then the Pymander shows a certain indebtedness to Greek mythology. For this anthropos, this heavenly man, gazing down into the abyss, gazes as though into the depths of a still pool, or upon the surface of a burnished mirror. And looking down into the abyss, he is like Narcissus in the Greek legend. He sees, looking back up at him, a strange shadowy likeness of himself. This is the projection of his own thought in the daydream of creation. It is his first sensing of the power which he possesses within himself to create by reason. That reason generates, gives birth to things. That it is not merely for the constant remembering and handling of dead facts. That reason is a living thing, a God. And that which possesses it can bestow life. And this anthropos, looking down, becomes enamored of its own mysterious reflection, and descends or hurls itself from the ring of the governors down into the darkness of the underworld. It goes not because of sin, it goes rather because of fascination. It goes because within the nature of mind is an eternal inquiry, that the thinker cannot exist without his thought, that reason cannot escape the instinctive desire to reason, that the noun is forever giving birth to itself in the form of the verb. Therefore, that the thinker without a labor is inconceivable. An existence which does not seek to solve the mystery of itself is inconceivable. And an existence that is not fascinated by the projected shadows of its own creation is also inconceivable. So we find this universal man moving downward, precipitously, but voluntarily. And as it moves downward, there is a reaction from below. A mysterious veiled being, like Erda, the great earth mother of the Nordic rites. A mysterious mother, mother principle, rises out of the darkness of the below and envelops the anthropos with robes of mist and of darkness. Envelops it with strange protecting garments. And in these garments it falls into darkness and into sleep. And suddenly it is born again. And its birth is in the birth of body. And this thing which fell from the rings of the stars is reborn as the weeping infant coming into this world. Now, Hermes is not really telling us the story of human birth primarily. That is not his motive. Remember, our anthropos, or our man now, is a kind of mind. Of course, the great mother, the enveloping mother, is form or body, which to protect this mind in the darkness of the abyss wraps it in a kind of swaddling garment, which is also not different from a grave cloth, and thus protecting it, protecting the power of the mind by encasing it in a form. It then leads it downward into the world of form. And we find then archetypal man passing from the state of a spiritual existence to the state of a material existence. And symbolically, man the thinker is born into this world. Man not as a person, but as an instrument of reason. Man as a projection of the Father. Man really is the wish fulfillment of the eternal. Man as reason, exploring the darkness of the field of its own thought. So what has actually happened now is that the dragon, having projected the archetype of creation, creates an instrument by means of which it can move into its own archetype. This instrument is archetypal man, the symbol of Manus, the mind thinker. And taking upon itself the likeness of its own mind, it moves into its thought, falls with it into nature or into matter, and comes forth as embodied reason. This embodied reason is a strange thing, for it has a tremendous invisible and a comparatively limited visibility. This creature, wrapped in cloths and robes, is almost incapable of motion. It has lost all memory, as in the famous Gnostic hymn of the Robe of Glory. It has lost all memory of its own origin. It has, however, come into existence with a spark, and this spark is the seed of reason. And it is this seed of reason without which no thing can be created, and which is intrinsic in every atom, every electron, every indivisible, ultimate, minute particle of energy or substance. Every one of these contains the seminal reason of the infinite. It contains the seed of eternal truth. This mind, then, coming forth and becoming the archetypal material man, becomes the parallel of the Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalists. For this is the Adam made of the red earth. This is the Adam whose nature is outwardly earthy, but whose inward parts still belong in and to heaven. Now this man, or this eternal power, this wonderful anthropos, has stood upon the rings of the seven governors, and descending into the darkness of material obscuration, has brought not only with it the power of the divine reason, but also brings with it the powers of the seven governors. These seven governors being the active agencies by means of which reason is served, by which reason projects its purposes, and by which reason is gradually brought into orientation in the material universe. Thus we find in the Pymander, or the Great Vision, that Hermes describes a multiplication of this primordial man, having become absorbed into the mystery of material diffusion. This man becomes seven men, multiplying itself according to the mysterious powers of the guardians, or the governors of the world. And therefore the archetypal man, now embodied, but although embodied, not obvious to us, for we see no giant standing with its head in the sky. This becomes a totality which is broken up within itself to produce the seven men. Now it is pretty obvious that Hermes is now telling us the story of the archetypal man by which we shall say humanity, the totality. Humanity as one. Later, by the action of the differentiation of the seven governors, we find the one man as humanity, a reversal of position. So out of the one man come the seven androgynous male-female beings, and these, in the Hermetic tradition, represent the seven races. They are the seven differentiations by means of which humanity can be variously distinguished into levels. And each of the races, therefore, is an embodiment of the power of one of the seven guardians sitting upon the circle of the stars. And the infinite progression of things. And these generations are reflected as the gradual individualization of the power of reason. Each of these seeds develops within its own nature its own individuality. For the symbol of the anthropos, or the universal man, is the symbol of individuality rising in the universality of divine reason. So out of all of this comes the mortal mind, mortal reason, the human thought, the human projection of its own thought purpose. And the result of all of this combines to produce individuality. And the final statement of individuality, I, or selfness. And this I is a pillar set up in the soul of man, just exactly like the great column was set up in space. And this pillar of selfhood, or selfness, becomes man's great center of assurance. It becomes the mysterious axis tree upon which turns the entire wheel of his existence. And it is this same wheel which, as Buddha taught, he clings to so desperately in the cycle of transmigratory existence. So there is an I, a column set up in the soul, which to each individual becomes the peculiar symbol of his godhood. But this symbol of his godhood is a strange and illusionary thing. And in the pursuit of it, man passes into a constant procedure of separation, segregation, division, further division, until finally, out of the one comes the circumference of ultimate diversity. And while the eyes shine like little stars, matter becomes an incredible area of selfnesses. And these form a new kind of matter, which is interesting and curious in itself. For just as the earth is made up of an infinite number of small material particles, so what we call culture, civilization, the vast area of human project, is composed of a kind of substance made up of an infinite number of selfnesses grouped together to form structures. These structures we may call economic, political, religious, artistic. They become schools and sects and creeds. They become doctrines and arts and sciences, forming like bodies and are composed of infinite units, compounds, each one of which must ultimately be dissolved. Thus all mental and emotional forms, cultural forms and concepts are temporary kinds of bodies composed of the voluntary cooperation of selves, of selfhoods, that stay as long as they wish to stay, or endure as long as they can endure, and then depart. So we have another interesting level, namely that self, iota, the ego, is the column set up in the midst of our own natures, by which we seem to see or feel the presence of a tremendous and enduring power. But this power is purely symbolical. Hermes then beseeches the great mind, reason, which is the eternal dragon, to reveal to him something more. He has now learned of how Leviathan, this dragon, gathering unto itself a third of the stars of the heavens, carried them forth into the abyss. We have, again, a biblical parallel. Now, according to Hermes, comes the greater mystery of it all. How this infinite number of separate I-nesses shall finally be reconciled. How from the base metals and substances of nature, the infinite mind shall be rescued and restored and revived. And reason explains to Hermes that all these forms and bodies set up in nature are merely the instruments of its own purpose, and that its purpose is the complete and full discovery of its own unity. Man, in order to experience that which is good, must have certain need, must have desire, and must be capable of the archetypal thought of good. It must have the ultimate archetype of unity in order to experience its own eternal unity. That which is undivided knows not its own unity unless it passes through the experience of apparent diversity and discovers itself. Thus reason, through this vast pageantry and circuit of things, is forever concerned with its ultimate goal, self-discovery. That from the exploration of the not-self, it shall be restored to the equilibrium of the self-knowing. And the great mind or reason tells Hermes that the course of this is a vast cycle of which the death of man is a miniature representation or replica. And the reason says to Hermes that man is separate from truth because of the various deflections which affect its minds, which affect its attitudes, and particularly divide it from others of its own kind. The formula for regeneration as set forth in the vision is almost completely Buddhistic. But it is not certain that it was brought from India, although it is possible that it could have been, because the doctrine of Buddhism had been well established in Asia for 450 years before the probable date of the compilation of the Pymander. In any event, this pattern, perhaps supported by the Babylonian account of the adventure of Ishtar at the seven gates, certainly gives us a clue to what we want. The soul passing out of the body at death, therefore proceeds toward the goal of liberation. What is death to the body is achieved by a certain disenchantment of the mind. Thus, as body must die to release its occupant, so illusion must die in order that the truth content in reason may rise victorious over error. Here again is a strong psychological position. And in this sense, death thus becomes disenchantment, the reason escaping from the wiles of the senses and from the pressures of material situation. We have something a little reminiscent also of the Parzival legend and the young prince and his experiences in the enchanted garden of Klingsor, the black magician. This disenchantment, like in the story of Mohammed's night journey to heaven, consists of the reason ascending through the 7 orbits of the planets, ascending through the 7 gates of the governors of the world, and voluntarily returning to each of the governors the conditioning qualities which that governor has bestowed. In other words, man fell by taking on attributes and qualities. He rises by renouncing them. So we have a bit of astrology coming into this pattern, which is perfectly consistent with the times, for in those days astrology was as sound a science as physics is today. People regarded it with just as much appreciation and keenness of affection. So the disembodied being, the disenchanted one, who has wakened from the sleep of material life and has passed out of this world of matter into the sidereal world of the divine machinery, moves first upward through the gate of the moon. And there, as Hermes says, It relinquishes the power to increase and decrease. In other words, it ends the moods, or renounces its strange allegiances by which man has become servant of the moon, servant of change, servant of vacillation, servant of mood, servant of generation, servant of all these things which in their inconstancy hold up the mirror of illusion in which the being sees the distorted reflection of itself. So to all the strange illusions of night and darkness, the waxing and waning, from the strange laws governing the 28-day cycle of the moon, from all the strange world of phenomena which is associated by the ancients with the lunar orb, and constitute together the lunacy of old time. These are rejected, cast off, returned again to their custodian, where they shall be held to be used by others who need them. But now the soul is returning to its homeland. And having relieved itself from all of these mysterious bonds and bondages, the soul then ascends to the gate of Mercury. And here it returns to the guardian, or the worker of the gate, in its own way, those things which belong to the world of Mercury. And Hermes says that these include all manner of deceit, all manner of false thinking, all schemes, all plots and strategies, all brilliant intellections which have no substance in themselves, false knowledge, false learning, sophistication, that by which brilliance is mistaken for truth, and the light of sophistry is substituted for the light of reason. These things must return again. And man, to pass through the gate and ascend, must pay the fee of the gatekeeper. And at each gate, the gatekeeper demands its allotment from the nature of man, so that at each gate man loses something of his mortal or corporeal nature. And he ascends to the third gate. And here he must restore to Venus those things which are the peculiar province of this goddess. And most of that which he must restore is vanity. Vanity must cease. He must never again be moved by appearances or the outward semblances of things. He must not chase the will-o'-the-wisp of gratification or of idle fortune, nor must he in any way be deceived by the seemingness of anything. He must penetrate appearances, seeking for that beauty which is in the soul of things, and not indoctrinated only by those symmetries and graces of form which he has mistaken for the presence of reality. Having paid the keeper of this gate, he goes on and approaches the gate of the sun. And here, to this guardian, to this one of the seven governors, he must restore its substance, which is ambition. For here he must return to the gatekeeper all of those things which bear upon greatness, all desire to excel others, all comparative search for self-aggrandizement, to escape from the illusion of high office or the delusion of humility and humble station, to escape also from the temptation of possession and the great temptation of all, to use what we have to the detriment and destruction of those who have less. This must be left with the keeper of the gate of the sun, and then the soul proceeds onward to the gate of Mars. And here the gatekeeper also demands his fee, and to him must be returned all contention all discord, all hate, all warlikeness, either of the mind or of the body. Here likewise there must be an arbitration of every conflict which can possibly affect adversely the spiritual destiny of the soul. To Mars, therefore, must be given back temper, anger. Even righteous indignation has no place. All things but gentleness must be renounced. And then to the gate of Jupiter the soul ascends. And here it must perhaps sacrifice more than in any other place in our way of thinking today. For here